U.S. naturalization processes, denials, immigration scams. This is going to be part 1. Part 1 topics. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on U.S. naturalization laws. Processes starting in 1906. That's a banner year. It divides a lot of things before and after. Certificate of arrival is a very important feature. Special circumstances. And then we'll look at some applications that were denied, some deceitful requests, and then some scams, some frauds, mainly about Ellis Island getting around the law. Part 2 is going to look in some depth at immigrant names and manifest searches. And Part 2's subtitle is Why Problems Occur Finding Names on Ship Manifests. You know, I'm interested in that topic. And here are some of the topics on Part 2. Getting a certificate of arrival. Name section on the forms. Reasons for. The immigrants are actually going to tell us why they changed their name. Problems finding manifest. And then I'm going to have a case study. Okay, so let's do a little introduction here. What is naturalization? The process by which U.S. citizenship is granted to a lawful, permanent resident after meeting the requirements established by Congress. And the value is that depending upon the year of naturalization, the records may include vital information about the applicant, including their birth date, birthplace, method of getting to the U.S., and physical descriptions. I have a very good book in my collection about They Became Americans, Finding Naturalization Records and Ethnic Origins. All of these references I'm going to put in the show notes. So before 1906, Errata says, generally speaking, most pre-1906 naturalization papers contain little information of biographical or genealogical value. But don't give up on it. I have in my files, for instance, this from 1890. It's a declaration that's just filled with information. Naturalization records for finding mostly pre-1906 records. There is an excellent reference called Naturalization Records in the United States. And this is what the book looks like. As I say in the show notes, you have a reference to them. Now, in 1906, a lot of things changed. And so if you're looking for somebody coming in or becoming naturalized, first check with the appropriate National Archives and Records Administration regional archive that covers that area of your immigrant of interest, and email or phone them. There's a list of these online. Tell the archivist the full name, birth date, birthplace, approximate naturalization year, county in which the naturalization occurred, and relatives if known. But if you cannot find records through the archives or the courts, then consider the USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, previously known as the INS. Under the Freedom of Information Act, they should provide copies, but there are steep fees. And the present fees are just a search is $65, and if they find something, then another $65 for copies from microfilm or hard copy. And here's what their website will look like when you get to that. The genealogy records request. Okay, so after 1906, or at least starting in June of 1906, an immigrant trying to become naturalized will go through a set of steps. Step 1 is filing a declaration of intention. They have to be a U.S. resident for at least 3 years. If they go out of the country and visit and come back, the clock starts again. Those are known as first papers. And the declaration should include name, age, occupation. You can see that there. Description, birthplace, how they arrived in the United States, marital status, spouse and children, etc. And they renounced their allegiance to whoever they were at in their old country. And here is a look at just a random in my files of a declaration of intention. A lot of information. Now sometimes in the more recent ones there might be a picture of the person on the lower left. Step 2 is getting a certificate of arrival. Step 2 is not the petition. It's getting a certificate of arrival that certifies to the naturalization court that a candidate for U.S. naturalization legally entered the country on the date, ship, and port shown on their application by actually checking the original records. It is needed before the petition is submitted. And I'll show you some the application forms here. This is going to go into a lot more detail in the part 2. But here is one from 1920, a request for certificate of arrival for use of aliens arriving after June 29th, 1906. And it says, sir, he says, I came to this country after June 29th, 1906. Please obtain a certificate showing my arrival in the U.S. and forward it to the clerk that will eventually do the naturalizations when everything is completed. And in addition to that, there's an accompanying statement given where I landed in place of my arrival. There's an expanded form, and there were lots of different variations of these forms in the 1920s. I happen to have a blank, or at least a partially filled in form, and you can see here what it looks like and its measurements. It's a 4-page form. And on the top, it says, important notice to applicant. It's very important that this form be carefully and completely filled in. Then take or mail it and your first papers, remember that's the declaration, to the examiner's address. And the examiner's address on this form is in Chicago, Illinois. It's the district director of naturalization. It also warns you that this form is not the final petition, but is used to obtain essential information which must be furnished by the applicant before a petition may be filed. I think it's a little ambiguous. I think that should read, this form is not a petition, but is used to obtain essential information before a petition may be filed, because this will be sent out to the port for them to check the actual manifests. And to the alien, it says fill in all the blanks in this form. There's quite a number of questions. Be sure the information is correct, and then mail it to the examiner. And you need to send your declaration of intention with this form. And here's what a certificate of arrival looks like. This is actually from my grandfather. There was so much fraud going on, by the way, that in 1926 they required the verification clerks that went through the manifest to actually record on the manifest what their activities were. And this picked up in 1930s, early 1940s. So I'll give you an example here. If you look closely, you'll see that there are additional things written in. These are annotations. The one with the arrow says that even though they found this person, they didn't issue a certificate of arrival, no C/A, because something was mismatched. But the individual would probably get a second chance to provide information. In order to find out what all these annotations are, there's an excellent resource. You can go to Jewish Gen, And what you do is you go to the Learn section. You go down to Search Methodologies and Research Advice. That's over there. And when you do that, you'll find out that there's a series of essays there, including one on that says "Wow," which are manifest markings, a guide to interpreting those annotations you will see. I actually have the next one there, Finding Immigrant Names. That is an essay that I produced for them. And then here is what that important essay is by mainly Marion Smith. It's a guide to interpreting all these annotations. A very, very useful reference. You should note that. If you want to know a little bit more about this whole area, about immigrant records, there's quite a bit of material there. Elizabeth Burns of the National Archives and Records Administration has an excellent online workshop, presentation on this, and keep that in mind. So step 3 is the filing of the petition after you get the certificate of arrival, and it's at least 2 years after filing the declaration. Generally, it has the same information as the declaration, plus the 2 witnesses you will need vouching for the applicant, plus a request for a name change if you wanted to do that. And here's what the petition looks like. This is actually a petition for a case study that we will look at the end of part 2. Person who came in, they could not find his manifest, and he actually sued Ellis Island to gain access to it. It's an interesting story. I won't ruin it for you. So there's a lot of information there. There are his witnesses. Witnesses are very important. And witnesses have their own set of legal documents. They actually had depositions taken. In this particular case, the applicant was in the East Coast, I think, but he had to show that he was in the United States for at least 5 years, 1 year in the state that he was in before he filed the petition. And he announced that there were going to be depositions taken of his witnesses, but the witnesses were actually in Oakland, California, as you can see on the bottom. And the witnesses came before a notary public, and that would be filed with the court. Here he says to the court, I think I desire to take the depositions of these 2 people. I think both of them are here, Charles and it looks like John, and it's going to be done in California. And then they were asked questions. The notary was there, and there was a notarized statement. So it's very detailed in terms of these witnesses. How long have you known this person? Are you actually a citizen yourself? Etc. How often did you see the person? Etc. The witnesses are really important. I have a favorite story about witnesses I want to share with you. And here is the petition for naturalization for one Charles Ponzi, the infamous Ponzi. He didn't invent the Ponzi scheme, but it's really named after him. And so he had a life of crime. And he was an immigrant. He came in, he tried to petition for naturalization. He went through the process, and he got to naturalization. But then, suddenly, he told the court he wanted to withdraw his application. So here is his petitioner's motion. Being advised that my petition for naturalization, numbered as above, and filed in this court on the 28th day of March, 1925, does not conform to the naturalization statutes in that it is not properly verified by the attesting witnesses. Not properly verified. I move that it be dismissed without prejudice. Well, I'll show you what the problem was. So here are the 2 witnesses. Peter was a lawyer and Henry was a salesman. And then you can see that they've added some additional information there. So after they say, well, this is a person of good moral character. They said accepting for his arrest in 1920 at Boston for using the U.S. mails in a scheme to defraud, in Massachusetts state courts for larceny and conspiracy. Better make sure that your witnesses actually can verify that you have good moral character. The preliminary questionnaire that you should have filled out and that Ponzi should have filled out was a question about, have you ever been arrested? It would be interesting to have seen his form. These forms, they're very rare to actually see them online, and we'll talk about more of that in part 2. But I did find this, that here's a person who decided, if they're going to ask, have I ever been arrested, I better tell them that I was arrested and fined on charge of speeding. And it almost looks like they actually look in the court records to confirm that. So step 4, the court grants citizenship based on the petition, the certificate of arrival, witnesses, interviews, knowledge about the U.S. Constitution, and oath of allegiance. And then they would issue a naturalization certificate, which a lot of families still retain. The court retained the petition and certificate of arrival, and sometimes the declaration, but usually not the naturalization certificate or the paperwork for getting the certificate of arrival, which is really too bad. The certificate should have the date, court name, and petition number, not the same as the certificate number. So if we look at this was a really fancy one. Unfortunately, these kind of end up on online auction sites. You figure that maybe they didn't have any offspring, etc., and when someone cleaned the house, they put these online. On the upper right, in red, is the certificate of naturalization number. That's not important if you want more information. Instead, if you look on the left, the petition number is important, and so is the court that issued the naturalization. Just remember that. Now, there are some special circumstances you should know about, and especially with women and naturalization in the United States. And Marion Smith has an excellent article in Prologue magazine on this. So we'll do some summary. Before 1922, for a long period of time, that married women and children gained citizenship when the husband father was naturalized. These are immigrant individuals. So, but an alien female who married a U.S. citizen automatically got citizenship. That basically says the same sort of thing in 1855. Then what happened was, there was a period of time between 1907 and 1922 that any American woman who married a foreigner who was not a citizen of the U.S. lost her U.S. citizenship and assumed that of her husband. Women after 1922, that derivative citizenship no longer applied, and married women had to go through the full naturalization process if they were not born in the United States. Now, to give you an indication, and I have some original scans, I'll tell you more about those in the second part, and I'll blow this up. This is from Minnesota, so this individual, Albert Hupp, has gone through the procedure. The court says to him, you advise that I have today mailed to the clerk of the district court at Ashley, North Dakota, the official certificate of your arrival in the country. You may now take your first paper, your declaration, and your witnesses to the office of said clerk of court and file your petition for naturalization. And you must at that time deliver to the clerk of the court your first paper, the declaration, which must not be less than 2 years old, nor more than 7. And then it says, it is noted that your wife was born in the United States, but she lost her citizenship. Under the law as it existed prior to September 22, 1922, she lost her United States citizenship, by marrying you prior to that date. Under the law as it has existed since 1922, your naturalization since that date will not confer citizenship upon your wife. She must herself file a petition for naturalization and thus regain the citizenship lost through her marriage to you. She will not require a declaration of intention and will be required to prove only 1 year's residence. She must pay the regular petition fee of $4. If she files a petition at the same time you do, then you may both have your final hearing at the same time and possibly use the same set of witnesses. So they did this person a favor by pointing out some strategies here. Here is a preliminary form for petition for naturalization, and you can see on the top it says no CA needed. And if you look down, and let's see, I think, yeah, you can see that the woman is Mary Lash. She indicates that she was born in West Virginia, so she has lost her citizenship because, and I think I have this somewhere, let's see, no, I don't show it, but because she married an alien. And so what she wanted to do was retrieve that. Retrieve her citizenship by reapplying. In 1936, Congress allowed these women, in cases where their marriage ended in death or divorce, to be able to file an application with a local naturalization court, take the oath of allegiance, and get their citizenship back, making it a little bit easier. And so here is this application to take this oath of allegiance. And let's see, here we have Luella Deakin, who married a citizen from Great Britain. See if I have symbols of that, maybe not. And then he died in 1926. So that made her eligible for just taking the oath and getting her citizenship back. In 1940, Congress allowed those women who lost their citizenship to reclaim the U.S. citizenship regardless of their marital status. They still had to go through that oath and that formal document. Military service was another special circumstance. For World War I and II, military non-citizens of the armed forces didn't need to file a declaration, meet residency requirements, or need a certificate of arrival. Okay, so I thought it would be interesting to share some stories about people who were denied citizenship. And let's look at two of them. So here we have Uzi Golik. He files his declaration of intention. He indicates that he's an oiler. He works on some sort of engine situation. He shows where he was born, and he immigrated on the vessel Russ, etc. So he waits a number of years, and he applies for a preliminary form for a petition for naturalization. And we look at this form, and we notice that there's some interesting things here. He says here, the name on my steamship ticket was Uzi Golik. That's on the upper part. And then lower down, he says, on the line that says, I arrived as what? As a passenger, stowaway, deserting seaman, or otherwise, that he's a seaman. Well, if he's a seaman, why does he have a ticket? That doesn't make sense. So it goes out. So there's his name. And there is the seaman situation, which is should raise a red flag. And then he gets to this letter. He says, Dear Sir, this is to advise you that your preliminary form for petition for naturalization, declaration of intention, and certificate of arrival here today have been forwarded to the Common Pleas Court in Pennsylvania, who will notify you when to appear for the purpose of filing a petition for naturalization. Hey, that's great, right? In this connection, you are advised that the certificate of arrival in your case shows that you arrived in this country at Norfolk, Virginia in 1919 on the SS Russ as a deserting seaman without payment of head tax. You advise that it is the administrative view of this department that the only certificate of arrival which can be used to properly support a petition for naturalization is one which shows a legal admission to this country for permanent residence herein, and for that reason the facts in your arrival will be called to the court's attention for determination regarding your eligibility to naturalization. Doesn't sound good. Payment of head tax recently received from you, and this must have been done after he suddenly realized that there's a problem there, for which receipt is enclosed, did not legalize your entry, but was merely a compliance with the moral obligation of every alien who enters this country to pay such tax. And here is the certificate of arrival they issued for him, and after his name, deserting seaman, no record of payment of head tax at that time. I checked the census schedules, and I can't find him after, there's no indication that he was still in the country. Now let me show you another one that was denied. The preliminary application asks them to sign your full and correct name in your own handwriting, so they expect people to be able to write, even if it is in their country, their old country. So here we have a request for certificate of arrival, and you can see that the person didn't sign their name. They made a mark on the bottom right. They did that X, sort of that plus. And then they had witness on the left to that mark. And they did the same thing for the attached form. And they must have done the same thing for Wilhelm for his petition. He could not sign his name. And so the clerk wrote to the chief of the naturalization examiner about this situation, and he responded that, Dear Mr. Piper, I am in receipt of your letter of first instant relative to the petition for naturalization of Wilhelm Freemarks. You advise that the law specifically requires that when a petition for full citizenship is filed, the applicant must sign the same in his own handwriting, which means, of course, that the applicant must be able to write. It is noted from your letter that Mr. Freemarks signed this petition by crossmark and is evidently not able to write his name. In view of this situation, the court will be without any authority of law to grant this petition, and I regret it will be necessary for me to move dismissal thereof. There is no exception made, and he goes on, blah, 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 blah. And there's some questions about homesteaders there. But what was nice was that this clerk in North Dakota wrote to Wilhelm and said, Dear Sir, I am in receipt of a letter from the Chief Naturalization Officer in which he states that your petition for citizenship will have to be dismissed for the reason that you signed same by mark. The law requires that you sign his name in the English language. I would suggest that you make arrangements with the school teacher in your district this winter to give you instruction in the English language and also in our form of government, national, state, and county. They can be quizzed on that. You must learn to write your name. If you do this, you can come in the 1st of February, 1922, make out a new petition, and be ready for the naturalization hearing in May. And I checked the 1930 census, and Wilhelm Freemark, if you look at his line all the way to the right, shows he was naturalized. Hopefully that actually did occur. Now, given the fact that people had to jump through hoops to become naturalized and even to get into the country legally, a pocket industry came about trying to get people illegally into the country and illegally to become naturalized. Humans are predictable. Ellis Island, before that Castle Gardens, had a history of graft, as the contracts awarded bribery for getting immigrants into the country and through the naturalization process, and extortion for those who originally paid for the bribery. It's not a pretty picture. And in fact, their Judge magazine has this picture called America's Hearty Welcome to the Innocent Immigrant. Castle Garden is shown in the back in New York before Ellis Island. And I think this was an illustration from about 1885. And all those people are ready to fleece these immigrants. But they could fleece them, well, there's a number of ways of doing that. I'm going to show you two examples about illegally changing manifest entries with consequences to certificate of arrivals. So this is the scam. This was in 1922. These are from newspaper articles, and I'll show you one citation in a while. So the steamship landing agents, government inspectors, and immigrant welfare society agents who had pretty much access to the ships were accused in 1922 of fraud. So the scheme looks like this. The liner docks at the pier, releases the first and second class passengers. They're not going to go to Ellis Island, but the third class, the steerage ones, would be ferried to Ellis Island. The society agent on the dock sizes up an anxious stranger. On the dock, finds out he's waiting for a third class relative and tells him that he'll find out whether his or her status is on board the ship. The agent goes aboard the ship and tells the inspector to hold her up a while. He agrees and knows the scam. So the agent goes back on the dock, tells the relative, well, her papers are not in order and she may be deported from Ellis Island if she goes there. So the anxious relative says, what can we do? And the agent tries to get $150 if possible to get her off the ship. Now, an inspector, a yearly salary would be about $2,500 in 1922. So the agent goes back on the ship and the inspector lines her name off the manifest list and stamps a landing card for her without signing. People were pretty lax with these landing cards. So by lining her name off the manifest list, it's like she was never on the list. Very clever. And the immigrant then has this landing card and exits the ship. The bride is shared with the agent, the inspector, the federal inspector, and the shipping agent, who would understand the situation of a third-class passenger leaving the ship on the dock, resulting in a fine. Another possibility is the inspector lines off a name and adds a name to the U.S. citizen sheet, so the number of ships immigrants remains the same. It's from the New York Herald, April 9th, 1922. And as I say, there are a series of newspaper articles on the scam. It could be even a first and second class immigrant, or that the inspector holds her back and waiting for a bribe on the dock. So my question is, what happens when our immigrant tries to obtain a certificate of arrival to become naturalized, but now can't prove that he or she were on that ship and voyage? The fraud led to indictments and also changing how ship manifests were handled. Only the ship purser could change the manifest, restricted who could see the manifest and when, and all landing cards must have signature initials of releasing the inspector, so that you can have some responsibility there. So just because they had a landing card, they didn't know who perpetuated the fraud. Now they would, if that fraud continued. Now, a much more technical fraud was cracked down in 1935. It was found that records at Ellis Island had been altered. Official documents were missing and files relating to cases of fraud had been stolen. Sums ranging up to $100 are alleged to have been paid in cases involving false witnesses or passing of an applicant who had failed in his test of knowledge of the government or his ability to speak English. It is alleged that fees ranging from $300 to $1,200 were levied in cases involving fraudulent or altered manifest records. And then once they had these people who provided this money, then they blackmailed them regularly after that. It was a lucrative business. I'm going to show you one in particular. Frederick Tuttle was the former acting assistant commissioner of immigration at Ellis Island, and he was indicted for a number of manipulations of the manifest. And one of them was a immigrant by the name of Bozo Galantic, who arrived, and this is a quote from the article, who arrived in this country in 1927 by crossing the girders of the Niagara Falls Bridge. Didn't walk over the bridge, he walked under the bridge. After which the statement charged that Tuttle arranged for an alteration in the manifest of the steamship Mount Clay to show that the alien had arrived in 1931. And this one I was able to find. So here we have the manifest of the Mount Clay, and on the bottom where, there are a bunch of blank lines, it says that Bozo Galantish, this line is not considered legal entry. The entire record is a forgery, And if we look at this, actually this is the second page, because there was a 2-page immigration manifest. He was going to his brother, Matt Galantish, and I think you can see clearly that Polish on the right, that P is different than the permanent status, and that if you look closely, that, for instance, Park Avenue, the E there is a different E than the typewriter down there. So this was caught. Blow that up a little bit more for you. So there's the P, and there is the avenue that I was pointing out. Now, if they really did it all the way through, they should have also forged the book indexes. These you should know about. This actually is an 1892 index of passengers aboard this particular ship. Now, in 1906, they required all ships to provide a book index. The book index was on this type of book, but not only did they put the names of the people in alphabetical order, but also the sheet number and the line number. So if a clerk got information about providing a certificate of arrival from the application, he would go first to the book index, look up the individual on the name of that ship, and then he could go to the sheet and line number, and it would save him quite a bit of time. So here's the Mount Clay, and I was curious, is Galantic in the G's? And the answer is no. So if they had really, really done a good job, Galantish would have been on 2912, sheet 29, line 12. He was 18 years old. So remember that part 2 has immigrant names and manifest searches. We're able to actually see when immigrants changed their name, what reason they had to do that. So I hope you enjoyed that overview. This is another of my JDW talks. I have YouTube talks on genealogy topics, census resources, Ellis Island immigration, and immigrant names, natural history topics, virtual birding field trips, birding optics, California birds, and miscellaneous things like novelty zithers and biology songs. So I hope those of you who are doing family history have gained some insight into things, and I encourage you to look at part 2, which will give you a lot of new ideas, new insights about why you can't find people on ship manifests. Bye-bye.